This video is not intended to encourage or glorify any kind of drug use. The sole purpose of these videos is to educate you on the dangers of what these substances can do to you. Please do not do any of the acts mentioned in this video. I repeat, do not do any of the acts mentioned in this video. I drank a fairly average amount during high school and my first 2 years of college. I didn't like to party, but I did love getting drunk with friends. I'm a husky guy, can handle a lot of liquor at once, but I never exhibited any problem behavior. That all changed very quickly. The summer of 2017, right before I moved back to Arkansas for my third year of college, my parents got divorced. In the fall, my dad got a debilitating brain infection and I dropped out of school to move home and be closer to my family. I moved in with my girlfriend of 4 years, who then broke up with me and kicked me out a month later. So there I was, a broken-hearted 20-year-old guy with a newly shattered family, back in my shitty hometown. So I started drinking, hard. I had a fake ID that I rarely used back in college. I was too scared to try it at bars or liquor stores, but in my hometown they sold hard liquor at grocery stores, so I started buying bottles of cheap whiskey that I chug every night to numb the pain. In the spring, my dad was doing better, so I went back to school and moved back in with my friends. I turned 21 soon after that, and all bets were off. I drank like a cartoon character for the next 2 whole years, almost comical amounts of alcohol. My friends and I were embracing the college burnout lifestyle, especially in the summer when it wasn't uncommon for each of us to put away a bottle of whiskey and a 6-pack every day. Eventually, my friends started to grow up and clean up their act, but I didn't. I knew I wasn't going to finish school. My family had no money left. I got a job as a kitchen manager at a pizza place / craft brewery, so free pizza and beer every night caused me to really start packing on the pounds. In late 2019, my dad had a really bad stroke due to lasting complications from his brain infection. I decided to move back home once again, this time taking my new girlfriend with me. We ended up living with my mom and her new boyfriend. Soon afterwards, COVID hit. This is when my drinking got really bad because I had to hide it. I went from being a free adult drinking whenever I wanted to being back under my mommy's roof. Her and my girlfriend could both tell I had a problem, so they began watching me more closely, which resulted in more private trips to the gas station to buy Gatorade, which really meant 4 or 5 airplane shots and a Gatorade to cover up my breath. This continued until I started to notice negative physical effects. I started getting sick to my stomach all the time, and throwing up became an almost daily occurrence. In August 2020, I was helping my mom do a landscaping gig at a bar, and I got caught on camera stealing liquor from behind the bar when I would go inside for breaks. After this, I went to rehab for the first time. I was there for 3 weeks, 1 in detox and 2 in the chemical dependency unit. They put me on all kinds of mood stabilizers, which I didn't need, and stopped taking once I got out, but they did put me on Seroquel, which was a saving grace at the time, but later turned out to be a huge mistake. I had always had sleeping problems, which was part of the reason I drank so heavily at night. What I didn't know was that Seroquel is dangerously addictive. Anyway, I stayed clean for about 2 months before my girlfriend broke up with me, and I relapsed immediately. It was bad for a few weeks, but eventually I got to a point where I was drinking like a regular human being again. Definitely still excessive, but it wasn't all day every day. I could go out somewhere, have 4 drinks and be satisfied. It was definitely progress. In the next few months, I got over my last ex very quickly and started dating an old friend that I'm miraculously still with today. A few months into our relationship, she announces that she accepted a job in Austin, Texas, and that she'd be moving there in May. I agreed to move with her, but decided to wait until August so I could stay at my job and save money. Big mistake. The moment she left, the stress drinking came back in full force and completely took over my life. It was back to all day, every day. I was a pizza delivery driver at this point, and I was essentially getting paid to drink and drive. I got into 3 separate accidents on the job, only one of them involved another car, but it totaled mine. It still blows my mind that I didn't hurt anyone or myself. My car was always overflowing with empty shooter bottles and tall boys. During this time, my anxiety got so bad that I convinced my psychiatrist to prescribe me Klonopin. I was never into taking benzos to get high. I just felt like at this point I needed the real deal to help calm my constant nerves. This ultimately made things worse, as I was now on 2 extremely addictive medications that, coupled with my alcoholism, made for some seriously dark withdrawal episodes. By the end of the summer, I had been hospitalized twice for dehydration, vitamin deficiencies, and low kidney and liver function. The second time, they did an endoscopy and found several ulcers in my esophagus and a yeast infection at the entrance to my stomach. They had me detox for a few days, gave me a bunch of meds for the ulcers and infection, and told me I had to quit drinking. Obviously, I never took the meds and went out drinking the night they discharged me. When I moved to Austin, I knew I had to get things under control, and I did for a couple months. Then my dad had yet another stroke. I couldn't move back home again. I had practically just gotten here. So there I was, living in a brand new city and knowing that my dad was back in the hospital 14 hours away. I gave up. I started drinking in a more savage, pathetic manner than I ever had. My girlfriend thought I had quit drinking after the second hospitalization, so I had to hide everything from her. Eventually, she knew what was going on, but we never spoke about it. I got sicker and sicker, rapidly. The main problem was my stomach. I was always so nauseous that I could never stomach most foods. I could also no longer stomach most hard liquor, so I was reduced to constantly chugging the strongest and cheapest malt liquor I could find, flavored Steel Reserve or Four Loko, supplemented with Fireball and hard seltzers. By December 2021, I had the same daily routine. I would wake up at 5 a.m., shake and sweat profusely until 7 a.m., when places started selling alcohol, when I would go to the gas station. I would get 3 tall boys and sit in the parking lot, alternating between drinking them and throwing them back up for about an hour. I would then go home, try and then fail to go back to sleep, then repeat this process one more time. When it was time to go to work, I would buy a 10-pack of Fireball shots and a 6-pack of White Claws to hide in my backpack and drink in the bathroom throughout the night. I would usually have to excuse myself to throw up 10 times per shift as well, meaning I was damn near useless on the job. I would get a few more tall boys on the way home, which I would drink and then throw back up. Then I would lay in bed in agony until I finally fell asleep for an hour or two, then started all over again. I had completely given up on water, and I had mostly given up on food. At one point, I didn't even attempt to eat for 4 days. I couldn't even get drunk anymore because I could barely digest the alcohol, so I was in a state of constant withdrawal. My anxiety and sleeping meds stopped working entirely, but my symptoms would get a million times worse when I ran out of them. My heart rate was always at around 120, and I was just waiting for that heart attack to come. Because I wasn't getting any food or water, just malt liquor and Fireball, the only nutrient my body was getting was sugar, so my shit and piss smelled like rotting fruit. I was completely malnourished, but I had swelled up to 265 pounds and was practically unrecognizable to people who had known me just 2 years prior. Every night I got stuck in hypnagogia, the state between awake and asleep, and it turned my nights into a hellish whirlwind of altered reality and stressful half-dreams. At one point I had a vivid sleep paralysis episode where I could hear my girlfriend having sex with another guy in our living room, but I couldn't move or scream to do anything about it. At that point I wouldn't have been surprised or even mad if she was cheating, because I had turned into a complete shell of my former self and a nightmare to live with. I finally realized that there was a 0% chance of me being able to pull myself out of this, so I checked into rehab for the second time. I have now been clean from alcohol and benzos for 1.5 years, and I now take trazodone for my sleep problems instead of Seroquel. My life is 1,000,000 times better, my relationship is 1,000,000 times happier, but I'm still stricken with anxiety about the damage I've done to my body. It took me a long time to realize that I had a severe eating disorder on top of my addiction, and all that puking has left me with near-permanent heartburn, not just acid reflux, the kind that makes you go to the ER because you think you're finally having that heart attack before they explain to you that your esophagus is just in really bad shape. I also now have extreme anxiety towards driving and can't really drive for more than 45 minutes without starting to dissociate then panic. I am so thankful for my health and the fact that I somehow didn't completely destroy my liver, but knowing the amount of damage I've done to my body has left me with a permanently paranoid outlook on life. On On August 20th, 2010, my mother collapsed and stopped breathing. Her boyfriend called 911 and then my dad at work. My dad called me at 7:30 a.m. to tell me what had happened. I had just gotten back from sleeping in my car all night after a fight with my husband. My mother was an alcoholic, so was her boyfriend. My first reaction was that it was more of her drama and that she probably fell down drunk or had a seizure and that she was fine. I dropped my son off at school and then headed over to the mobile home park she had recently moved into. As I turned into the park, my stomach began to swim. I suddenly had a bad feeling. The paramedics were standing outside of her mobile home. She was either fine or dead. I had a sick feeling that she was gone. I walked up to the paramedics, who looked pale and apprehensive as the 7-month pregnant woman was approaching them, crying. I asked if she was gone, and they nodded. I walked in and saw her body on the floor by the foot of her bed. She was covered with a bloody sheet, and I refused to look under it. The cause of death was acute liver failure due to excessive drinking. She was 48 years old. She never got to see my son, who was born 2 months after her death. I did get the chance to say I loved her 2 nights before, but it preceded a bad fight about getting her life together. My drinking was also out of control. When I got pregnant this time, I swore I wouldn't let it get as bad as it was again. Unfortunately, I would break down occasionally and guzzle 2 or 3 beers once a week while pregnant. My relationship with my husband was, and still is, a nightmare, and we had to move back into my father's home with my brother, which resulted in constant fighting between everyone. I strayed from drinking heavily for a few weeks, but it quickly caught up with me. My home situation was, and still is, wearing on me. It's been 18 months, and I drink enough some nights that I black out and not be able to do anything the next day. My son missed school today because I just couldn't get out of bed, and here I am, drinking some more. I haven't gone a day without a drink in about 2 weeks. Some nights, I drink 4 or 5 beers. Other nights, I drink 10. I am so tired. I love to drink. It relieves my anxiety. It gets me to sleep. It makes me want to be social and to enjoy things. My drug of choice is hydrocodone, and I actually drink much less when I take it, but I only get so much a month, and the other days I have to fend for myself. I just don't see an end to this, and I cannot believe I would let alcohol take over my life, as it destroyed my childhood and robbed me of my mom. It's a sad story. Alcohol is not evil, but people need to understand the power of drugs and to respect it. It can sneak up on you. Trust me. I am updating my report, written almost 1 year ago, about my alcohol addiction. I had forgotten I had written it, probably because I was high on Xanax and drunk. I had my 3rd son this past November. I cut down on my drinking, but did not stop while I was pregnant. I allowed myself only 2 beers a night, except for 6 different occasions when it was 3. A third of the nights, I did not drink at all. My son was born healthy and happy. He hasn't had any problems thus far, thank God. Obviously, I still have a problem though. It took a couple weeks, but I am back to my usual drinking habits. I think it may even be worse. The funny thing is that I don't even really like drinking. When I take hydrocodone, my drug of choice, I hardly drink at all. I wish I could take that all the time, instead of drinking. I also take Zoloft every day, and Xanax when the anxiety is unbearable. I know that if I don't stop drinking, or cut it down, it will shorten my lifespan. How can I keep doing something even though I know it's going to kill me? Like I said, I don't even enjoy being drunk all that much. To me, it feels chaotic and overly emotional. The reason I think I drink is that it tends to my boredom and anxiety. It's what I look forward to every day. I just focus on getting through the day until I can drink at night, which has been the story of my life. I hate it, and yet I still drink. I wake up every morning with fear, guilt, and just being plain sick from a hangover every day. I know that only I can stop my drinking, and I plan to attend AA meetings to help. My advice is to be careful. I have 3 children, and I will tell them about our family history of alcoholism and how it took my mother's life, and that I need to get help myself. This report is just one story of several similar, but distinct dives into some of the deepest pits of mental anguish I have experienced while withdrawing from chronic binge drinking. A bit of background. I am a male, 29 years old, and am well seasoned with psychedelics and started my experimenting from the age of 16, including LSD, mushrooms, MDMA, DMT, 2CB, and others, and have had my share of difficult experiences. When I try to explain to people that some of the most tormenting and nightmarish headspaces have come from withdrawing from alcohol, people generally have a hard time comprehending how that can be possible. I became a chronic drinker and what some may call an alcoholic at around the age of 20 after a difficult and traumatic life event had left me with a, then undiagnosed, anxiety disorder so debilitating that I had lost nearly all of my ability to function socially, to the point that leaving my home was enough to trigger a panic attack. And this started to affect my work life, friend life, family life, etc. I should add that I was one of the vibrant, though a tad naive, happy-go-lucky types that had a lot of friends and was almost like a big kid, totally unaware of some of the dark and covert dangers that lurk in the world. So I was always benignly trusting of people. I was an open target for sociopaths to prey on. I was to find out. So after certain events left me a shell of my former self, and long before I was to get proper diagnosis for an anxiety disorder and PTSD, I was in a confused and damaged, debilitated state. And though I never really liked drinking prior to this era in my life, maybe once or twice a month at a party, and was much more keen on smoking cannabis, I remember one sunny afternoon having a few drinks with a close friend, and it was almost like magic. Those few cans of beer took away my anxiety, and I felt like my old self again. It was truly like a miracle for me, and this was the beginning of my dependence on alcohol. Naturally, over a pretty quick amount of time, a few beers daily turned into a few shots of harder stuff during the day, turned into a bottle a day, turned into multiple bottles at all times of the day and night over the course of about 2 years. Though in the beginning, I was social again, and my friends were happy that I was back and attending get-togethers again, and able to work and just function in general. Slowly but inevitably, the alcohol started to take center stage in my life, and I was to again sever my relationships with friends, family, and work by not only doing some incredibly stupid and hurtful things that I wouldn't even be aware of in my drunken state, but also putting my drinking before any other aspect of my life, even my closest best friends who love me the most. Now, I was a recluse again, for a whole other reason. So, I'm in my mid-20s, now jobless, and still living with my parents. I was a chronic alcoholic who was living to drink and drinking to live, much more than any sane person should drink. A doctor would have been horrified. Fast forward a bit, I knew I had a problem with drinking and that I needed help. All in all, I would go on to have 4 stints in rehab from the age of 25 to 29, and up until today, I am currently, knock on wood, still sober. But the nature of alcoholism and addiction in general is that if left unchecked, will undoubtedly creep back into life. The story of my nightmare withdrawal experience begins, funny enough, right off the heels of my second stint of rehab. I had just completed rehab, and naive as I was, I thought I now had the knowledge to be able to handle my alcohol and drink like normal people again, like I used to once upon a time in my life. So the very afternoon I returned home, I went straight to the liquor store, picked up a Mickey of my favorite brand of vodka, and decided to celebrate. It, of course, only took a matter of weeks before my controlled drinking, once again, became unmanageable, and I was back to my usual all-day, all-night drinking, alone in my parents' basement, style of life. Some binges would go on for 3 or 4 days straight, no food in these times, no showering, brushing my teeth. I wasn't even leaving the house to pick up more booze, but just having it delivered to the door, as this was the early days of the lockdowns up here in Canada. I would be truly isolated and was physically and psychologically dependent on booze. There were times during these periods where at the end of my binges, I was too physically ill to even drink more, but much too ill to eat, save for a few granola bars and protein drinks and the occasional fruit, and I also couldn't sleep. Those were the times that I would experience the slow and excruciating descents into the hell and madness of alcohol withdrawal psychosis. I truly wouldn't wish those states on my worst enemy. It would always begin something like this. I had just come off another long bender of drinking for several days and nights with little food and sleep till I couldn't drink anymore. Then, I would feel it start to come on, and I knew what I was about to go through. It would start with an increasing sense of paranoia. Every noise that a house usually makes in the middle of the night was amplified tenfold. Every creak or crack in the walls would make me jump, and my mind would tell me that it was someone trying to break into the house, or police, or other shady agents were stalking me and had been following me for years, and were finally coming into the house to get me. When I would make panicked phone calls to family or the crisis line, noises of audio crackling in the phone were the agents tapping the calls to listen in on my conversations. I would stay up and just sit in front of the security camera monitors at my parents' house, just waiting in horror to see if anybody, or indeed anything, was walking around the house or trying to get in. By this point, I would have turned on every single light in the house, and I triple-checked to make sure every door and window in the house was locked, because what might have hid in the darkness terrified me, and I would just sit in idle silence, listening, waiting for the inevitable terror to finally meet whatever was coming to get me. Then, as the mental paranoia would progress further, I would begin to go into a psychotic panic state where I felt that whatever terror I was trying to evade was now inside of my head, reading my thoughts, and I felt like I could not escape, and not even my very body was safe. And I would squeeze my head with my hands and pace around in circles, hyperventilating, just to try to get some solace, some escape from this mounting stress and panic. Eventually, I would escape into my room, pull the blanket over my head, and try to sleep this state off, and when I would close my eyes is when the real hell would begin. This is when I would start to have delirious visions, waking nightmares, and see entire film reels begin to play in front of my eyes. Visuals that would even, dare I say it, match those of certain psychedelics in a dark room, closed-eye setting, only of a much darker, much more gruesome nature. Again, I say they were like film reel projections, very flashy and shuddery and grainy in nature, but specific in their color tone and content. The alcohol withdrawal visuals always have a specific mood and feeling associated with them for me. The feeling of impending doom, mixed with somehow feeling like I was in hell, doomed for eternity, and that these projections were coming from a dark psychic alien entity that was communicating them to me. A sense of futuristic intelligent nightmare, mixed with apocalyptic scenes of eternal death and destruction. I would usually see film reels of faces that looked like they were speaking, then would suddenly be split in half or mutilated like they had been attacked by a machete or mauled by a rabid animal. Or a reel of somebody walking unnaturally fast, then transforming into a black shadow entity that would just stand and stare at me in an odd posture. Some images were like watching grainy film of the piles of dead bodies like the Holocaust. Some were of destroyed cities and screaming families crying in place or running for their lives. I saw images of bodies being cut open in the most horrific way and people dancing with the innards of said body, dogs attacking and tearing people up, and also people cutting open a tied-up hanging dog. There was also scenes of a sexual nature on display, people having orgies and odd BDSM types of sex, but nobody seemed to be enjoying themselves. It was like these people were sex machines, if that makes any sense. That was the feeling of the images: sex, death, hell, and bloody despair. Every gruesome manner of death, despair, and depravity you could imagine was in those mental projections. But the oddest things I would see were the more vivid, more brightly colored images of giant insects. I'm talking right up close, looking at them in the face type images. But these were not ordinary insects. They were humanoid insect figures and seemed quite intelligent and even telepathic. Don't ask me how I figured that. That's just the vibe I would get. And I would feel that these futuristic alien insect beings were ones beaming these mental images and feelings into my psyche. But it wouldn't even stop there. Another common theme in these delirium states were the reptilians. Similar to the insectoids, the reptilians were also physically invading my head, but instead of beaming in odd images or just simply looking inside of my head with cold calculation, the reptilians were overtly malevolent in the vibe they gave off. They would appear as half human, half reptile entities and felt like they were attacking me somehow. Their nature seemed to be more brutish, more unforgiving, and much meaner. It was like getting attacked by a creature on an old school Doom game. I would hear their groaning and grunts in my head, like a predator honing its focus on me. These reptilian hallucinations would even follow me into the open-eye world, where when the mental torment of keeping my eyes closed under the blanket would become too much, and I would open them and throw the blanket off of me. And I would look into my brightly lit room and see almost translucent but still flashy in nature hallucinations of the reptilians standing around in my bed. One time, I remember looking towards my window and seeing a snake-like humanoid entity float into my room and quickly disappear. But more so than seeing them, I would feel their presence around me, and it was terrifying. I would feel several large beings around me, feeding into my fear, then simultaneously consuming and feeding off of that fear in an amplifying feedback loop. Variations of this condition would last through the worst of the withdrawals, and unfortunately, the only way to stop it was to drink more alcohol. During these periods, I would stay up all night until the sun would come up, and I could hear the rest of my family walking around the house, and only then did I start to feel some semblance of safety start to creep back in. This is usually when I would, full of shame but also stricken with panic, ask and plead with my mother or father to let me have some of the alcohol they had put away for me for when I would get into these states, just enough to get me somewhat level-headed again and out of this delirious state. Reluctantly and painfully, they would oblige, seeing what alcohol addiction had done to their son and the mental pain of my current suffering in that moment. Episodes like that happened many times over a span of many years. I would go on to attend rehab 2 more times in following years, with my longest stretch of sobriety being about 8 months. I am currently 3 months sober as of writing this account, and I'm picking up all of the pieces of my shattered life and working towards rebuilding it. It's not easy, and again, I wouldn't wish what I've gone through on my worst enemy. Not just the delirious states, but the damage overall that alcohol has done to every aspect of my life and self-esteem. Please, if you think you have a problem with alcohol, seek help. You're not alone, and it truly does feel better on the other side. It is tough work, and it's okay to slip up many times like I have, but don't give up on yourself. You can make it through the dark night, and you don't have to look back. And for anybody who thinks alcohol is a benign drug compared to some others, just because it is legal and culturally accepted, remember to enjoy with caution. It really is easier than most people think to slip into dependence and full-on addiction to the substance. I'm by no means trying to say don't drink and don't have a good time. I'm just saying to be aware and use common sense and discretion when choosing to indulge and to treat alcohol with respect, for it can be a very powerful and cunning substance that can consume your entire life. What an incredible story that just was. I mean, it just goes to show you what alcohol can really do to you. I am fortunate enough to not get addicted to it. When I turned 21 in 2020, I would drink every day. I would go to the liquor store once or twice a week. My favorite thing was Jameson whiskey or Tullamore Dew. I would go through 1 or 2 bottles a week. I can't remember, but I was drinking every day. I'd go to work and I was super hungover, and I just can't believe I did that to myself. Luckily, I've stopped drinking. I drink occasionally, like once a week, maybe even once every couple weeks. I'm not even sure. It doesn't happen too often anymore. Not even at restaurants. Like, I usually went out and got some kind of drink with it, like a margarita or something, but now I just get an unsweetened tea with my meal. And that works out just fine. You don't need alcohol. Alcohol is one of the worst substances out there, and no one wants to admit it because everyone does it. And like this guy said, it's okay to drink every once in a while. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like getting fast food. I mean, fast food's bad for you, but getting it every once in a while isn't too bad. But yeah, the things that alcohol can do to you is just crazy. Having said that, be sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video so far. If you haven't already, of course. You hear that every video, so yeah. Also comment down below what you think of this video, and any experiences with alcohol you might have. Alright, let's move on to the next story. I live in Finland, and at the time, was living in an apartment building. I drank straight booze and strong beers for at least a month from when I woke up until I passed out. At the end, or when my psychosis kicked in, I was in the shower. I heard banging, music, and people aggressively screaming at me to quiet down. And I swear, I heard the words "percoline percoli" or "devil's devil" in English. Then I got out of the shower and tried to fall asleep since it was nighttime. But I heard music from the apartment above that was threatening to kill me or asking for me to move out. After that, I stood up from the bed and investigated the situation. Then, I heard the man going outside and playing the same music while revving a chainsaw and yelling. I then called the emergency hotline and went outside of my apartment to investigate. Then later on, I thought the man was running and screaming towards me, and the police tried to take him down, so I ran away from this imaginative chaser and hit my head on some railings. After I was sure the man was gone, I went into an ambulance, and only then was the psychosis cool. I felt all of the drugs I've taken before to kick in one after another. At one point, I felt like I was stoned on weed, then suddenly, I felt like I was on acid, then came the speed. I was sent to a mental hospital. From the hospital, I continued to have paranoid auditory hallucinations for weeks on. By the way, I am only 20 years old. Monday, 7:30 a.m. I chugged a fifth of vodka and got smashed. Normal routine for me. 10 a.m. I decided to chug another fifth, not routine, and from there, I blacked out. Next thing I know, it's 5 p.m. I went to the liquor cabinet and found it empty. Oh shit, I had no money left, so I knew what comes next. Hell. I knew it was going to be a rough night, but not like I ever expected. One should know that I haven't touched alcohol since this happened, and I pray for those who still suffer such an affliction. Anyway, I'm sure you heard about pink elephants. Well, it's not true. They are actually demons, horrible demons. When the withdrawals began, I began to shake violently. This was normal for me, considering that I went through it several times before. Then I blacked out again, which I didn't expect. I can only assume that it was a seizure. When I came to, it was around 2 a.m. That is when the hallucinations began. I was sitting on the roof of a Victorian-style house looking at the ground approximately 3 stories below. Sitting next to me was my fiancée. The funny thing is that she died 3 years prior. I've been drinking non-stop since. She pointed to the lawn below and said, "You should be down there, not up here." After that, she transformed into a nightmarish thing that I couldn't possibly describe in words without crying. It then picked me up and threw me off of the roof. When I fell to the ground, it hurt. It actually happened? Not likely, but when I came out of my delirium, I realized I was wandering around in my neighborhood and there was a huge gash on my head. I had lost a lot of blood. I happened to have my cell phone with me, so I called myself an ambulance, in which they treated me for my injury and detoxed me safely with Librium. Today, I am alcohol-free and happy. As correctly expected, there was some hard toll to pay for the excess that I logged in. Biologically, I am an alcoholic, yet I often go for very long periods, months, without getting drunk, and even for years without going on a binge. As my drinking career has progressed, though, my body's ability to process alcohol has certainly changed. In the present case, I had the following experience. Initially, nothing much different than a regular hangover, other than particularly heavy sweating, some quick heartbeat, but far, far worse, because not present in mere hangover, were the psychological effects of what is clinically known as major withdrawal. Terror, and what I found worse, auditory, tactile, and visual hallucinations, which were sometimes indistinguishable from everyday sounds, feelings, and sights. These included the humming of bees, the dripping of water, the strange reflections of light, but sometimes utterly surreal and nightmarish, morphing shapes, and certain creatures that all humans deeply fear. And it was these that produced sudden and even greater near-total confusion, heavy sweating, and a frenzied heartbeat rate. The onset of auditory hallucinations began exactly 24 hours after my last drink. All especially horrifying, because there is no drunkenness to mask them. They appeared in the light of day, and instantly led me to believe that I was going insane. Thank heavens, I had spent the last few of those 12 days tapering down, and I had eaten a lot the day before cessation, and had taken mega doses of vitamins, and had drunk much juice and water, and, needless to say, no alcohol. So, I lay in front of the TV in order to keep my mind somewhat focused on a fixed reality. A surrender to stream of consciousness would have entailed very nasty things, which nevertheless visited me, yet in a previously unknown intensity. The worst period occurred during a period of about 4 hours, between hours 42 to 46 after cessation of drinking. This began with the visualization of geometrical patterns, not so bad. But the visions quickly became ones of putrefaction, horrendous scenes of decay and filth, worms squirming from the eyeballs and the like. I found myself writhing and trying to focus on thoughts of my loved ones in order to dispel these visions. Scorpions, snakes, all of these things, just dropping onto my bed. I would swat at them, only to confirm that they were not real, yet the momentary terror became manifest. I kept seeing the extremely rapid descent of something down the outer edge of a heating pipe that runs through the ceiling of my bedroom down to the apartment downstairs. This went on for 4 hours, yet it felt like an eternity. 49 hours after cessation of drinking, right after this most terrible withdrawal, I fell into a deep sleep. All in all, classic alcohol withdrawal. Yet, when it happens to you, there's nothing normal about it. During days 3 and 4, I did achieve the sought-after state of clarity. I was able to discourse on philosophical topics. I am a philosophy professor by training, with remarkable precision and even insight. This state, I suspect, is perhaps a ruse of the drug, occurring exactly when neurochemistry has more or less successfully adapted to the drug. On the other hand, I might be wrong, as people on very, very long stretches of addiction also report achieving such a state. I got through it, but it was the most horrendous 24 hours I'd ever experienced. Think you know what a hangover is? Good. I curse the day that this substance came into the world. I had been drinking daily for about 8 or so years. Pretty much always beer, but pretty consistently. Started with a few beers at night, turned into a lot of beers at night until I passed out, then turned into day drinking to keep the shakes away, and again heavily at night until I passed out basically. Well, I say night, it's more like the morning as I work graveyard shifts and usually get home around 4 or 5 a.m. As you might imagine, there isn't a whole lot to do after work getting home when mostly the rest of everyone is asleep, so I pretty much got into a pattern of playing video games and drinking till I couldn't really focus on the screen and eventually pass out. It really escalated in the last 2 years or so. I would spend close to $30 a day on beer, usually a 6-pack throughout the day, and then I'd get home and drink a couple 22-ounce beers and usually put a dent into another 6-pack. I should mention I usually sprung for craft beers, which is why it cost so much. I always felt sickly to some degree, and drinking seemed to help, but of course was also the cause. I would occasionally drink too much or too quickly, convincing myself for whatever reason that before I go and do something else, something as simple as leaving the room to go smoke, I should finish the beer I'm working on, which would often cause me to throw up. I don't think I even realized how often it was happening. It got to the point where I wasn't really getting hangovers so much as withdrawals. If I didn't have a beer right after waking up, I would have pretty bad shakes and often throw up. Sometimes even if I did have a beer, or again if I drank it too fast. I had almost no appetite for the last few months. Sometimes just putting food in my mouth would cause me to gag and sometimes vomit. I lost close to 20 pounds, sometimes only eating once every 2 or 3 days. I would feel hungry, but I couldn't stomach food, so I just drank more beer, which I guess the carbs filled me up to some degree. I was a mess. My room was a disaster, filled with empty bottles that I always told myself, I'll clean it up tomorrow. Needless to say, I never did. I was stuck in this endless loop. I felt trapped and ashamed, but I just kept drinking. It became a requirement just to feel normal. If I didn't have an extra beer or two laying around after waking up, my first instinct was to head to the corner store for more beer. Sometimes I was trembling so bad I could barely get my debit card into the slot. It was embarrassing, and I have to imagine the clerk noticed, but no one ever said anything. I had completely lost control. I'd wake up confused, wondering if it was day or night, if the dream I had really happened or not, if what I did in real life the day before really happened, or if I forgot to do it, or if it was supposed to happen today. It's hard to explain. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone. All this to say that last Sunday I woke up, felt very nauseous, and vomited up the absolute worst tasting straight up black stuff, like coffee grounds almost. It was nothing like it ever happened before. My immediate thought was, uh-oh, but I tried to rationalize it as like maybe I ate something weird. I hadn't eaten in days though, or my body was expelling toxins, or just kind of grabbing at straws to try and convince myself nothing was wrong, and I went back to bed. I don't really think I actually got back to sleep, just kind of these micro dreams and going between feeling too hot and sweating, then feeling too cold and back and forth. About 2 hours later, I rolled onto my back and with very little warning, vomited again, quite violently. This time, it was a mix of black stuff and dark red blood. That's when I knew something was very, very wrong and there was no rationalizing it. This was bad. Obviously, I was scared as hell. My girlfriend was awake and outside. I went to her, trembling partly from terror, and I'm sure partly because I hadn't drank anything yet, and told her what had happened and that, I think we should go to the hospital. She went upstairs and saw the bloody mess on my sheets and floor. We immediately went to the ER. By the time the first doctor saw me, I was sweating through my clothes and white as a ghost. I explained what happened and was pretty quick to tell him that I'm pretty much a full-blown alcoholic. I'm glad I was honest. Side note, definitely be honest if you see a doctor. You have nothing to lose. They are not going to judge you. They are there to help. So they noticed the trembling right away and I was pretty quickly hooked up to fluids, but they weren't 100% sure what caused the bloody vomit. This part is kind of a blur, but I was fairly quickly wheelchaired from the ER into the actual hospital. and put into another room where more tests were done. Honestly, I can't remember all that went on. It was pretty obvious though that I would need to stay overnight, so I was wheeled into a more permanent room and was hooked up to a couple IVs. One was for fluids, the other was for the withdrawals. I think I was given a few different pills as well. This all happened between like 10 a.m. to about 4 p.m. I pretty much just slept the rest of that day. I'll try and wrap up the hospital experience here. I ended up spending 4 days in the hospital. They figured out after being anesthetized and a thing put down my throat that I had a large tear in my esophagus. They fixed that on the second day, and I spent the next 2 days on a combination of drugs to deal with the withdrawals. Without professional help, and monitoring withdrawals can get so bad they can cause seizures and all sorts of bad stuff, but I'm sure most of you guys know that. I'm so grateful for the care I received, and they hooked me up with an outpatient program for meetings, and all that which I start on the 9th. Those 4 days in the hospital were the first time I'd been sober for more than a day in like 8 or 9 years. It took a scary as hell experience in 4 days in the hospital, but I've now been sober for just about 10 days. It doesn't sound like much, but it's a huge deal for me, and honestly, I haven't felt this good in as long as I can remember. My appetite is back in a big way. I can't tell you how amazing it feels to enjoy food again. This has changed my life for the better, and if this whole fiasco didn't happen, I'd still be drinking myself to death, I'm sure. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you so much for hearing me out. I just wanted to share my experience and also encourage anyone struggling out there to seek help before it gets this bad. Some people will definitely need more than just meetings to quit. You may need medical supervision if your withdrawals were as bad as mine. It can be very dangerous to go at it alone, and there are drugs that can help, and there are doctors that can help put you back on track. Take that first step. Don't put it off like I did. In a lot of ways, sounds kinda weird, but I'm glad I tore my esophagus, and I'm super glad there were doctors to help. I was too embarrassed before, and now I realize that was just in my head. Please know that you can get help and there's no shame in it. If you're an alcoholic, you have a disease. Doctors treat diseases. No one in the medical field will judge or shame you, even if some of the people in your personal life do. And frankly, you'll probably be surprised how supportive those people will be once you do take that first step. So here's to another 10 days, and another, one step at a time, but right now I'm feeling super confident and I'm genuinely surprised at how good I feel. I still get some shakes, but I'm taking gabapentin during the day and trazodone at night, and I couldn't get through this without it. You are loved. You deserve to feel better. Take that first step. You'll be so glad you did. It won't be easy, but you're stronger than you know. TLDR. It took a hole in my esophagus and vomiting blood to get me into a hospital where I got the treatment I needed for my alcoholism. 10 days into sobriety, and I'm feeling like a new me, and I'm determined to keep it up. Don't let it get this bad. People care more than you realize. I have been an alcoholic for more than 10 years now. Last year was detox and rehab, closely followed by relapse central with a fellow inmate of detox, which led to his death. After that, of course, I went mad with the drinking, as I had a huge justification due to my boyfriend's death. Then it starts to take its eventual toll on my body. No appetite, tired all the time, not to mention no money or proper social life. I drink alone. I begin vomiting blood and end up in the hospital. Each time they detox me, I swear I'm done and try and get on with my life. I always go back to drink though, like a person with low self-esteem goes back to an abusive boyfriend. Last Tuesday, I wake in the middle of the night and the familiar vomiting of blood happens, except it's a lot. I don't even have time to hide the empty bottles of wine. I just call for an ambulance. I carry on being sick a lot and throw up red clots and start to feel weird. I'm dying. I just know it. I get to the hospital and I'm being given black liquid. It seems to be calming down and I think, a few days in the ward and I'll be okay. Then comes a huge amount of bright red blood, at least 2 pints, then everyone starts rushing around. I am panicking and feel like passing out. Machines are beeping loudly, and then they're rushing me through the hospital corridors to the resuscitation room. I'm grabbing every doctor or nurse and pleading with them to not let me die. I'm given a general anesthetic, then all of a sudden I'm waking up and they say they have saved me and stopped the bleeding. I spend the night in the intensive care unit, then transferred to a recovery ward. I just got home after 5 days. The image of all that blood will haunt me forever. They're even talking about specialist procedures in a liver unit to fix the damage I've caused by drinking. I am done. I'll be in a coffin if I carry on. I have taken it way too far. The craving has already set in. I'm detoxed so I don't feel ill, but I'm restless and bored. But I just think of all that blood and how terrible I felt, and I just know I have to take this one day, even 1 hour at a time. I can't go back. There's so much I haven't done or seen. I'm only 34. Alcohol is an insidious, life-destroying drug. The culture of booze is integrated and pervasive. Enough said. My own experience with alcohol is like many others. I won't bore you with the buildup. Suffice to say, I was a weekend drinker, social drinker for many years, starting in my 20s until my mid-40s. I never considered it a problem. I saw others with problems, even saw a friend drink himself to death. It didn't hit home because that wasn't me. I didn't have that kind of problem. The final trip, which really killed my love affair with booze and nearly killed me, started off normally. A weekend drinking, nothing too heavy, but I continued to drink every day, getting to a certain point, maybe half in the bag, once or twice fairly drunk. This continued for about 10 days or so. By this time, with my years of abuse, it took quite a bit to get half in the bag and a lot to get drunk. I was aware that something was wrong. I hadn't been to work in days. I told myself to stop, but I couldn't wean myself off. It just went on. Finally, I started to get scared, which made me drink more. I knew I couldn't go to work smelling like I did. I tried to stop, but encountered fierce withdrawal. Finally, I woke up one morning and my eyes were almost swollen shut, and I was terrified. I had to do something, so I called my employer, spilled my guts, and checked into rehab. It took hours to get in, at which point I was shaking badly and on the verge of freaking out completely. I finally got in and was given a Valium for my blood pressure. I was assigned a bed and I laid down to sleep, and I felt that everything would be alright. I couldn't have been more mistaken. I was jolted from a deep sleep by pure, crystalline, heart-stopping panic. I had been asleep for maybe an hour, and no trace of the Valium remained. I later learned that elevated liver enzymes can burn through sedatives in a flash. I am emetophobic, and I felt like I was going to die. I found out that the nurses were not going to keep on giving me Valium, and so I gritted my teeth and hung on. I hallucinated. I stopped breathing. I couldn't sleep for fear my apnea would cause me to die in my sleep. I sweated and hallucinated some more. Horrible, mind-tearing visual and tactile hallucinations. I would fall asleep and wake up screaming, my heart pounding in my chest. I was convinced that wild dogs were in the room, trying to tear me apart. At this point, seizures were a very real danger. I begged them to give me something, anything, nothing, not even a Tums. Acid reflux was burning up my throat. My diarrhea was so bad, bile was running out of me, burning my ass. All the while, the terrible fear. After 6 or 8 hours of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I checked myself out against their advice, signed a release, and got the hell out of there. The moaning, zombie-like inmates shuffling around or puking blood in the washrooms, the worst smell I had ever smelt in my life. All my senses ridiculously heightened, smell, hearing, and touch. If a mouse farted, it would blast me out of a stupor. Once outside, I breathed the fresh air and felt a little bit better. I discovered that walking, mile after mile, feet in agony, back muscles spasming, was a good therapy, especially for the panic. The hospital was 10 miles away. I walked there, waited in the ER for another eternity, couldn't get in. I walked home maybe another 5 miles and tried to lay down, trembling, awful terror, hallucinated that there were worms in my veins. I felt like I had to crush the bulging veins to kill them. I fell asleep briefly near dawn, felt that the worst was over. It wasn't. Terrified all the next day, walked all over the city, trying to find someone to help me, a counselor, a priest, anything. It was Good Friday and I walked to a large church. It was closed. I fell down and started crying on the sidewalk. I'm not religious, but at that moment I prayed to God to help give me strength. I was a dirty, smelly outcast, and fortunately there weren't a lot of people around. I saw a notice for a clinic several miles away and walked there. I was completely exhausted and looked right at home with the street people in the waiting room. The mosaic tile on the floor looked like devil faces and tormented souls writhing in agony. I held on to a thread of sanity. I was ready to just step in front of a bus or train. Finally, a doctor saw me and gave me some electrolytes and some Ativan and maybe Librium, can't remember. I told them I was suicidal and a shrink saw me. I was sobbing like a child, and then the drugs took hold and I could pass out in an instant, but the slightest noise would wake me. Back in the waiting room, back to see another counselor, drug addiction counseling. Help numbers, a leaflet on AA and other groups. I felt so grateful. I walked home, spent 3 more days of rampant panic attacks, made almost bearable by the pills, and then the emotional and financial fallout. I was an emotional basket case for weeks afterward, and I should mention here that my employer was life-saving. They had put me on sick leave and welcomed me back and told no one. This act of kindness still makes me teary. I can't imagine what would have happened if I had lost my job. The stupidity of alcoholism didn't end there. I did this twice more. Finally, I killed it. My romance with this seductive, deadly poison was over. I no longer crave it or even feel any temptation or loss of social connection. It took me years to get to this point, but once I got there, it accelerated rapidly. It totally blindsided me. I don't care what anyone else does. I don't preach. If you want to drink, drink. Not me. I've had it. For years, I talked to my family and friends, but they just kinda blew it off like it was a typical relationship/marriage problems. I kept telling them that things were not okay, then he would be mean and his stories were never straight. He was a closet drinker. He would hold one beer and somehow get ridiculously drunk. At night, I would notice major behavior changes, but never was able to catch him drinking. One day, we were taking a stroll with our youngest son, and he couldn't walk straight. He kept saying he was okay and that I was imagining things. At one point, he lost his balance, and the stroller fell into the road. He pretty much gaslit me afterwards that me accusing him of drinking was absolutely outrageous on a Tuesday evening during a family walk. Long story short, when we separated, he moved into his own apartment. He was horrible during divorce proceedings, and his family and all of our friends took his side because they thought my accusations were just me being crazy. The day he passed away, the police found over 100 bottles of liquor, rotten food shoved inside all of his cabinets, receipts a mile long from the liquor store. His autopsy said his cause of death was chronic alcohol abuse, years. I called the coroner and he said that for him to die of alcoholism, he had to have been doing it for the last decade, if not longer. He died a few days before his 34th birthday. One of his friends reached out after the funeral and told me that he had confided in him and admitted to drinking about a fifth a day. I'm glad I made the decision I did for me and my kids. So many things happened during our marriage. We are lucky that we are all safe and alive. We were both professionals, so it was really shocking to everyone that took his side. I no longer talk to any of them, and I'm better off for it. So I guess if you have a gut feeling someone is drinking or acting strangely, they probably are. Trust your gut. My experience with alcohol has varied greatly over the years since my first drink at age 17. By this time, I had already been smoking pot for almost 2 years, so it wasn't my first experience with the psychoactive substance. I enjoyed the buzz, but certainly wasn't crazy about it. It sort of became a backup plan if I ran out of pot. Nothing excessive, just enough to make me feel warm and fuzzy. When I was 19, I moved to a different town and my herb smoking kind of tapered off. Maybe I outgrew it or something, I'm not sure. I went from smoking every day to once a week to once a month, if that. That year was my first experience where I was a full-on spinning, double vision, staggering drunk. Tequila was involved and I didn't enjoy it. Of course, no one told me that tequila is evil and sneaks up on you all at once. From then on, my alcohol use was fairly light, no more than 4 drinks at any given time and not on a daily basis, and it did not involve tequila. The next 3 years I stayed busy, held a regular job and all that good stuff. It wasn't until one day I found out that I, along with 20 of my colleagues, were being laid off because the company was in trouble. That night, 3 coworkers and I hit the bar. We drank all night until last call and headed to our respective homes, by taxi of course. The next 3 months I searched high and low for work unsuccessfully and eventually had to move into my mother's house. Unable to find work, living with my mom at 22 going on 23 and pissed off with my situation, I hit the bottle hard and daily. It started as drinking at night only, but every single night, progressing from a moderate buzz to borderline shit-faced. I started waking up with a hangover every morning, and the hangovers got worse and worse to the point where ibuprofen and a proper breakfast wouldn't cure it. I started using the hair of the dog remedy by adding a good-sized shot of whiskey to my coffee. This would be the point where my body became dependent on alcohol. Without that Eve opener, I would experience tremors and headaches. Eventually, I needed a double shot in my morning coffee, a couple of drinks throughout the day, and many drinks at night. The withdrawals got worse too. I even suffered what the emergency room doctor described as a mild seizure. I now couldn't go more than 4 waking hours without a drink. I continued to drink even after my episode that landed me in the emergency room, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I finally hit rock bottom when I got really drunk one night and trashed my mom's house, which I don't recall doing. But after nearly a pint of 151 and 6 twisted teas, who would? The following is what I was told. My mom called the cops, but instead of taking me to jail, they took me to the hospital because when they got there, I was sitting on the floor, barely able to sit up straight. Also, I blew a .425 blood alcohol level, which I'm told is dangerously high. The next thing I remember was coming back into reality, still rather drunk and trying to escape from the hospital. I figured I could get past the guards sitting outside my room, but didn't take into account that there may be 2 more guards right around the corner, which there were. I then accepted the fact that I was stuck. I had two options, a week in the detox and addiction counseling unit, or my mother was pressing charges, and I was going to jail for drunk and disorderly. Well, I chose option A, and I haven't had a drink in 24 days now. Life is less depressing without constant alcohol use or abuse as it was. I've been to some AA meetings and spoke with my doctor about the whole thing. There seems to be this common doctrine that alcohol addiction is a disease, and I have it. Basically, I'll never be able to enjoy a cold beer or two after a hard day's work or nice scotch on the rocks ever again. I'm not sure that I buy that. I know I had a bad habit, I know I had a chemical dependence, but I'm not sure that I buy into the fact that I have a disease or that alcoholism even is a disease. It could be that it's a disease of choice, but then it sort of strays from the classic definition of the word disease. I will, however, be taking a very long hiatus from alcohol, at the very least. Maybe after I'm happy with my life, I'll be able to handle alcohol responsibly like I once could. The question, however, still remains: habit, dependence, or disease? I used to be an alcoholic. Where I live, it is fairly common for people to drink a lot, so I never saw any issues. My first time being drunk was terrible. We were 14, and I remember when I took my first shot of Smirnoff vodka. My throat for some reason shut itself, and I couldn't breathe. It was disgusting, but I did it, and continued to. As the night went on, I drank everything I could get my hands on, from Four Locos to beer to tequila. I did not know how to drink at all. I remember the feeling that I absolutely needed more booze. Keep in mind, it was the first time I drank. I broke a few things, threw up, and went to sleep. My parents caught me the day afterwards because of all the puking in my eyes. I stopped for a while, but then in high school, I started drinking again. Just with friends at first, it was normal. Even some of my friends' parents allowed it. As I continued to drink every weekend, my tolerance went up, to the point where I chugged and chugged alcohol and blacked out at every single party I went to. I was a mess, and people started to notice. I was made fun of for not knowing how to drink, so then I learned, or so I thought. I once called one of my girlfriends and told her that I liked her. I did not call her. I'd called her sister, who was in my grade, cried and told her that I liked her and that I hated that we could not be together. I woke up the next day feeling super ashamed and with lots of bruises because I fell down so many times. I never had any issues during the week with wanting a drink. At this point, I still respected myself and would not drink on weekdays. But then the pandemic came. My dad was really stressed, and he started to drink every night when he arrived from work. He got worse, and I told my mom about it. She said that it was okay for him to drink because it was his only free time in the day, and after all the hard work, he deserved a drink. When I heard this, I did not think much of it. I was really annoyed at my dad because he screamed at us to go to sleep at 9 p.m. because we had school the next day. This fractured the almost non-existent relationship I had with my dad. I got really depressed, and after school, I started to drink in the evenings. I thought it was okay for me to reward myself with a drink. I then developed some really bad habits. Every time that I arrived from a party where I drank a lot, I would come into my house and directly go for a drink. Sometimes I had 3. I would always fall asleep and wake up with my cup half full. I had to drink it, of course. My appointments with my psychologist always landed on a Saturday morning, so I would go there feeling a little bit drunk, and I felt like the king of the world. I realized I had a problem and that things at home and school were not going well. I decided to go study in a small town in France. It was my first time in Europe, and little did I know that people drank a lot, in smaller amounts but more frequently. I made friends quickly and we started playing pool and drinking every day. During the 3 months I was there, I thought I learned how to control my drinking. I never had a bad night where I blacked out. I went back home with a girlfriend and newly acquired tastes. I remember the first time I went to visit her. We were going to a party and I was really sick. I had the flu, a very strong one. I felt like my heart was going to explode, but I had to see her because I had not seen her since coming back from Europe, and she was my first girlfriend. At the party, I felt like I was going to faint, so I drank, and realized the more I drank, the better and more relieved I felt. This was a mind-blowing discovery. Things got bad with her and me, and I started to really drink. Again, I never had any major problems other than throwing up and headaches. I had always gotten back up. I went on a trip to visit the friends I made in France and to show us around their town. They took us partying. I had a beer at the airport, wine on the plane, and when they picked us up, we went for beers and played pool again like we used to. The next day, we went to a casino. I had a few drinks there, and then we went to my friend's house. The plan was to stay there, but they got invited to a club and they brought us with them. We ordered 3 liters of tequila and finished it in about 2 hours. I was so drunk to the point where I told my friends that I was leaving by myself. They did not allow this, of course. The next day it was the same. I had so much tequila, if not more the second day, combining it with Jägermeister and Red Bull. I surprisingly got home safely, and I felt totally fine. The next day our national team was going to play in the World Cup. I woke up really early, feeling drunk, so I snuck out and had a little more tequila in the morning, then 2 hard seltzers at my friend's house. As I was on my second seltzer, I started to get a headache. It started getting worse and worse. I felt extremely dizzy and thirsty, so I ordered some electrolyte-filled drinks. I had 2 of them, but the pain was not going away. I then ate to see if food was the cure I needed. It was not. I then had sparkling water with salt and lemon because it apparently helped, but did nothing. I then went to throw up. It was really hard because I could feel like I was going to faint right away. I felt the need of peeing, but then as I tried, I couldn't. Nothing would come out. It was a terrifying feeling. I knew it was serious then. I felt so embarrassed, but I told my friends that I needed to go to the hospital. They were really scared and angry at me, telling me I was exaggerating, some even suggesting I drink some more. As I was in the car, all of my body was hurting. Just sitting in the car seat caused me pain. My chain even caused me pain, and I felt like I was going to die. My heart was beating at 180 beats per minute. My ears were ringing, and I could not open my eyes because of the bright lights. I told the doctor what I felt, and he said it was just a panic attack. He gave me some medicine to deal with the hangover, and that was it. I still felt like absolute shit, like I was on the brink. After arriving at my friend's house, I told them I was going to sleep. I talked with my girlfriend for a while and I calmed down, but then it all went south when I hung up. I tried to sleep and turned again and again. Everything was a pain. I was throwing up and looking up what was going on. I read that you could die from alcohol withdrawal, but I thought that the amount that I drank was not enough for this. I drank more on other days, but it was never this bad. I could not sleep at all, and as I was lying there, I started to hear laughter from the roof. It was odd since my friends were really far away from where I was. My friends told me afterwards that it was just the AC. I started to hear voices and screams. I saw some extremely scary faces. They were pitch black standing above me. I did not sleep a single minute that night, and I stopped drinking for the rest of the trip, and I quit drinking for about 2 months after this. I've had more problems with it, but I almost don't drink anymore because I smoke weed now. I never want to drink alcohol again. I cannot finish describing how terrifying it was because I still don't understand what I went through. Never normalize drinking large amounts of alcohol in your life because it is not normal and it doesn't lead to anything good. In the end of 2022, I was kind of a heavy drinker. My mood and mental condition began really worsening in autumn as I was burnt out from work, constantly restless, and drinking an equivalent of 20 to 40 beers a day. I began to feel psychotic sensations as impending doom, feeling surveilled, getting delusional ideas I mistook for memories, and feeling like someone was communicating with me telepathically. I couldn't sleep anymore without being very drunk, and as my condition worsened, I slipped more and more into my delusions, and lastly, into delirium. I was convinced and talked to relatives and friends about how I was soon getting married and becoming a billionaire. Some of my delusional ideas I was convinced of were, Elon Musk equipped me, my future husband, and a lot of other people with the nuclear-powered Elon Musk head, which basically turned us into living machines. Some other owners were important people like the Obamas, Keanu Reeves, and Mark Zuckerberg, for example. I stood up my future husband multiple times at the altar because of crazy circumstances. I actually went to the local castle because I was convinced it would be my next chance to marry him there. As I got out of the taxi, I actually saw someone that looked somewhat like him walk past me, and it sent shivers through my body. As of course nothing happened, I thought it must be his revenge for when I stood him up multiple times. I mixed up people's identities in my head, mistaked them for people from earlier times of my life. I was convinced I had a meeting with multiple important politicians in a local bar about the Russian war and was directly involved with their decisions and the ongoing events. I was convinced the local police had guns that shot little syringes with drugs inside that can make you vividly hallucinate whatever someone tells you. I was convinced the local police and I had met aliens outside on the street. I thought there was a giant conspiracy, and my head was filled with countless delusional ideas about how everything is somewhat organized around and against me. Most of the people were failed DNA experiments where the engineers would mix their DNA with insects and animals. One of these was the neighbor below me. I am actually 10,000s of years old and was turned into a machine after my brother, who would later become my future husband, fucked up I know, was forced to murder me after I was born. I actually don't have any siblings. My consciousness was once transferred into a star. I can talk to the sun and the earth via telepathy. I could also control the brightness of the sun. The telepathy works thanks to antennas on the roofs of the buildings. I thought Michelle Obama would come and rescue me from this weeks-long nightmare horror trip, bringing my future husband with her. These are only some of the ideas. There are a lot more, with many more details. In the middle of all this, I began to clearly hear the voices that were once only slightly more present thoughts, if that makes any sense. I began taking methylphenidate because I was convinced I had ADHD. I also tried doxylamine sleeping pills because I was no longer able to sleep for longer than 2 hours at a time, even when very drunk. I thought the pills were placebos and threw them away, as they had no effect at all. I took some smart drugs one day and slipped totally into a delirium, hearing very loud voices and feeling very poisoned. I was convinced a nuclear bomb dropped. I wandered around the city sometime and eventually got back to my apartment and called the police, who arrived fast and called me an ambulance to the psych ward. In the hospital, the delirium got worse, and I was in the closed insane asylum for 2 weeks, being put on Valium and antipsychotics. In the following 4 weeks, I was in the addiction station, with 12 weeks of rehab clinic afterwards, where in the last 3 weeks the psychotic episode ended and the delusions and voices were gone. Until today, and hopefully forever. This is the first time I wrote or spoke about the delusions I had in detail. If you wish to know more about it or want me to go further in depth, feel free to let me know. There are a lot more delusions I had to go through. I began drinking when I started college in 2003. As a skinny girl, my tolerance was about 3 beers before I was feeling pretty drunk and would want to go to sleep. After a bad breakup in 2004, I started drinking every day and I saw my tolerance skyrocket. I would begin my drinking in the afternoon and continue until I blacked out just about every day. At my worst point, I was consistently drinking nearly a liter of Jack a day. I know this for a fact because every day I would have to go buy a new bottle. In my last semester of college, I was an absolute alcoholic mess. I came to a realization that, fuck it, I'm not going to graduate anyway, and stopped going to class and woke up every day, had 3 top-shelf margaritas for lunch, and continued drinking beer or whiskey throughout the rest of the day. I would rarely be able to eat. I was usually blackout drunk by 8 p.m. This bender went on for nearly a month. I never sobered up. Towards the end, I woke up, went to class, and wham! The withdrawal hit like nothing I had ever felt before. I ran out of class, but my muscles could barely hold me up. I stumbled outside where I was violently ill to my stomach and began to hallucinate lights all across the sky, and I was unable to focus my eyes. I blacked out on the grass and woke up and began to have a full-on panic attack where I was shaking uncontrollably. I had a friend call the hospital right when my body was going into shock. My arms had seized to my chest and my mouth was blue. The EMTs were complete assholes who kept asking me if I was having a bad day. I explained to them that I was an alcoholic and I was pretty sure these were some pretty fucked up DTS, but they couldn't believe a little 21-year-old girl could have such a problem. So they just helped slow my breathing down, and my friends drove me home while I continued to hallucinate lights flashing and dashing across my field of vision, and I felt like I had absolutely no brain function at all. I had no motor control for the first 24 hours. If I tried to grip anything, even a soup spoon, I would begin to shake uncontrollably. This was the beginning of a literal 3.5 months of hell. I drank occasionally, which helped, but prolonged the withdrawals. I was violently ill to my stomach 24/7 and developed a hernia from retching so much. My esophagus was so raw, I couldn't even physically swallow alcohol without it burning so badly that I would cry. Whenever I laid down, the contents of my stomach would spill into the back of my throat because my stomach was literally lodged up there. I had severe anxiety and I couldn't drive my car, go into anywhere with bright lights, and if I heard any loud noises, my body would go into a violent panic attack where I basically went blind and I couldn't breathe or walk. I went to several doctors, but nobody would believe I could be withdrawing for this long of time, so they assured me it was just psychological. My skin itched so horribly, I scratched my skin raw. I couldn't digest food and became basically agoraphobic. I was so afraid of having a panic attack, I caused them every time I went out into public. This included several complete meltdowns in grocery stores where I tried to hand the teller my credit card only to begin shaking so violently I couldn't even hand it to them. I developed hemorrhoids, I know, gross, because all I could do during this was sit alone in the dark for weeks on end. I stopped drinking completely after the first month of cutting back, and the anxiety slowly tapered off. Eventually, I was given Ativan, which really helped, and I wish that doctors would have taken my problems more seriously and given it to me sooner, because it would have saved me so many months of torture. I tried drinking again last week after being 100 days sober and have been going through mild withdrawal all week, basic anxiety and nausea with some mild visual hallucinations. I did some research and found out that this is from the kindling effect, which means once you withdraw seriously one time, your body is more sensitive to alcohol and will go through withdrawal more severely even with less drinking. I'm now on the wagon because I can't imagine ever living through that again. As many teenagers out in the world, it all started off small. I began drinking at the age of 15. At first, it was so great. Any problems I had were instantly flushed away, and I felt on top of the world. Never in my entire life I felt anything that felt so damn good. As time went on, I began drinking like a fish. I was getting cocked, even at school. I used to get drunk to the point where I'd be throwing up and passing out. However I saw any fun out of that, I still don't know to this day. Even with my mother being an alcoholic, I still kept at it. Eventually, my mom saw what this was doing to her family and realized that she could potentially lose everything she worked hard for: her house, 3 beautiful children, and her husband. She got her act together, but I still kept at it. I've always had a thing for cars, and I'm 18 now. I finally got a really nice car, and I was so proud of it. All my life, my mom used to pay for everything I own. I got a job and began to save up. I ended up buying a 1993 Nissan Altima, decked out for speed. God damn, did I love that car. And for once in my life, I was proud to say I paid for it with my own money. It was all mine, and I felt so proud. Now, I always heard all the shit about don't drink and drive, but being as stupid as I was, I did it anyway. I was on my way home from playing pool at a pool hall where I live. I was so fucked up, I still don't remember the ride home to this day. I was about a quarter mile from my home when hell opened up on me. I was pretty much POD'd and had no clue what the hell was going on. I was going 50 around a bend. Half passed out, I hit wet leaves, and my car did a 180. The back end of my sports car hit a curb, sending me and my car I worked so hard for 7 feet off the ground. Now, what happens next is from what I'm told by police and paramedics and the kind souls that saved my life that night. My Nissan struck a utility pole at 50 miles an hour, sending my head through the driver's side window. The impact opened my trunk, sending my 12-disc CD stacker flying 30 feet from the wreckage. My sunroof immediately flew in front of me, 10 feet, at the same time I was violently thrown into the passenger seat. Now, that night my car was full, but earlier I dropped everyone off and was alone. Anyone in that car would have been instantly killed because the rear passenger door was smashed and pushed halfway into the back seat. My stereo system speakers were ripped out of place and ejected. Then, as quick as it all went down, I struck a rock after swinging from the utility pole. That night, I must have had an angel by me because my car was so fucked up that it looked like a trash compactor was just finished with it. Here's the crazy part. I only suffered bruises, split my head a little that only required 2 stitches, and got knocked out. For some reason, my life was spared that night, and I'm realizing now why that was. That was my wake-up call to cut the shit with binge drinking and drug use. I wasn't ready to die yet and have some purpose on this earth. Call it what you want to call it, but I call it fate. Drinking almost did take me to a place I have never been before. That is my very own grave. I'm so happy to be alive and see what life is really about now. I'm as straight as an arrow now, and call me a pussy if you want to, but I'm damn proud of it. I almost died that night. I would have never had the chance to see my friends or family ever again.
Now, to all of you who follow what I used to do, think again, please. You might get your wake-up call too, but chances are you won't be so lucky. I'm not saying stop totally, but have a sober driver at least, because the guilt you will live with killing someone will be horrible, and I don't think you want to live your life as a murderer. Look alive and be true to yourselves. Don't walk the same path I did, please. Try to get something out of all of this and realize next time what could happen. Death is a high price to pay for any of us.
Hi, I am writing to share my story here. I am a 26-year-old U.S. Army veteran. I am still in the Army Reserves and have been to Iraq. I am mostly posting this here because hopefully somebody who probably drives under the influence can read this, look at their choices from a different angle, and maybe think twice about driving drunk or high. About 5 months ago, I became the victim of a drunk driver. I was returning home from work when I was plowed into by a woman in a truck who was driving drunk and with no insurance. This person should not have been driving in the first place. She has and had a prior history of delinquency, and this was not her first infraction. What sucks is that because she was able to produce an insurance card at the scene, which was bogus or expired, she has not and will not be cited for driving without insurance. I've brought this up with my lawyer, the Attorney General, and the detective handling this case. Evidently, this is only a Class C misdemeanor and not that big a deal, according to them. What's worse, it somehow took my law firm over a month to tell me that she had no insurance coverage at the time. According to them, it had just lapsed, but whatever. This can be turned into a trip report of sorts, delving deeply into some of the shifts in consciousness I underwent during this very unpleasant ordeal. Although I came out of it with serious but reversible injuries and a few permanent ones, I was actually very fortunate to have survived such a devastating and brutal physical trauma. Here's how it happened. The time is midnight. I was standing at a crosswalk when I was struck so suddenly and so violently. Almost every bone in my face was broken. My left wrist and fingers were severely fractured. My right forearm was broken with bones poking through the skin. My ribs were cracked. My left leg was in quite a bit of pain. All my front teeth were knocked out, and I was choking on my own blood. I was conscious the whole time I was waiting for the ambulance with some people who were on the scene, who of course helped me out by calling 911. The moment I saw her running the red light and saw her vehicle run into somebody else's, then spin in the air towards me, this all happened in a split second, mind you, I briefly thought, damn, I am witnessing a crazy accident. The bitch ended up almost hitting a gas pump, but not before hitting my body, which knocked me back about 60 feet or so. I don't recall if I was ever unconscious. I doubt it. The next thing I remember is standing up, facing the other direction, and just being in such intense, undescribable pain that all I could do was yell. I screamed and I yelled very loudly, sort of a primal expression of intense anger and I don't know what. It truly defies adjectives, to tell you the truth. Somebody crossing the street with a cell phone saw me and asked me what was wrong or said something I don't remember. I was just so adrenal, this whole thing seemed impossible, almost like a dream. I specifically remember that at one point I thought I was watching a movie of this, or dreaming, or tripping, or something. There was a concept of, do I deserve this? I just got hit by a fucking truck. This only happens in movies, or something like that, but it was all fleeting. I even remember saying at some point that I'm gonna die now, and by now there were several people on the scene telling me I would live, and that my arm was just broken and I was bleeding a lot and my teeth were knocked out, that the ambulance is on its way. Yeah, I know. On the way to the hospital on the stretcher, the paramedic kept asking me about my chest and back and legs, asking if it hurt anywhere. I was so concerned with choking on my blood or that I would stop breathing, so I kept having him suction the blood out of my nose and mouth, kept asking him if I was in any danger of choking. He kept telling me that he was more concerned with my more serious injuries. The hospital stay was very unpleasant. After my facial surgery, because I had my nose in a splint and my jaws wired shut, They put a tube in my throat so that I could breathe. The tracheotomy left me unable to eat or speak for days and was perhaps the most unpleasant thing about the whole experience. I remember after the second day of having that tube in, I woke up and asked for more and more Benadryl, which they denied me. I just wanted to sleep the whole thing away as they had informed me I would have the tube in for days. At one point, during which my sister was visiting, I asked one of the nurses how much longer before they took the tube out of my neck. She replied 5 more days. My sister later told me that right after they told me that, my heart rate went up 20 points. At that moment, that was the worst news I had ever heard in my life. I have some vague memories of when they actually originally put in the tube. It was awful. I remember kicking and choking because they stuck a long, thin tube into my throat to suction me out, and I remember the doctors saying things like, "He thinks he's choking." At some point, I asked someone if they had given me ketamine for the surgery, and she was like, "How did you know? Did you hear us?" Both nurses and family members kept commenting on how I looked years younger and as if I had Botox injections because of the surgery. I think a lot of that had to do with the vigorous and extensive water fast. I actually do not consider it a fast because I only didn't eat, again, for almost a whole week, and my only substance was the IV and the few drops of water one nurse would come in and drop into my mouth on the 4th day. I broke this fast with a boost shake, which I had to drink out of a straw because my jaws were wired shut. I was fortunate that family members have allowed me to stay at their places between my trips to my appointments in a city in which I don't live. I have had to travel by Greyhound bus many times, depleting my personal savings funds and borrowing left and right from friends and family members for cab fare and other travel expenses. The pain and suffering portion of all this certainly isn't over, not by a long shot. It sucks because I'm a tax-paying, law-abiding citizen who has generally always stayed within the parameters of the law, who has done nothing but fulfill my obligations to the US military, and it is very unfortunate that because somebody else didn't follow the law, I have to suffer for it. I would normally follow regular workout routines and eat a predominantly organic diet, so my health means a lot to me. That night, years of hard work and dedication were taken from me. My right arm is still not fully healed. I have a huge invisible scar on my right forearm from the surgery, several pieces of plate and metal in my arm and face, and I still have no front teeth. I lost 3.5 of them, and the dentist I saw pretty much described the extent of my injuries as very severe and very complicated. According to him, it's a very long story. He says I can't get implants for about a year, and in the meantime I have to wear a retainer. Since the accident, my jaw is misaligned and will require either surgery or braces to fix, and I will have to spend a long time waiting until this problem gets resolved. Worst of all, I have no financial means to take care of these very expensive procedures. My only hope is that as time goes by, my scars will diminish and my injuries will heal more, and that eventually I can go back to a normal life. I am extremely depressed and understandably miffed at times, but it is really hard to pick an emotion to describe how this truly feels. Thank you for listening to this, to those who took the time. I have posted this on other forums and will likely post it all over the web, if nothing more than to raise awareness about the damage that can be caused in an instant. Dude, don't drink and drive. You could kill yourself or somebody else. You don't know how in control you think you are. Disclaimer, I work in IT and am far from a storyteller, but here it goes. I'll try to recall this as best as I can, and this covers mostly the time period of when it all went terribly wrong for me, and how it almost devastated me and my family. We'll start as far back as 2016. I knew I had a problem then, and after a visit to the doctor after some elevated blood work surrounding my liver, I learned that it was only non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I thought, meh, this is easy, I'll stop for a while then get back on it. So I did exactly that. Prior to all of this, I was always the heart and soul of any party, or so I thought. Every corporate event I went to, I was worshipped, again, pure delusion, as the boss that would happily put 5 figures onto the corporate Amex and make up the expense justification afterwards. It's amazing just how fast people fall away when that all stops, and while you're still the boss, you are now no longer the boss that returns from the bar surrounded by 5 other people, all carrying trays of shots. Madness. Anyway, back to my story. 2016 was a decent year. We all remember that pre-COVID feeling with no worries, great outlook in life, and love, and so on. This is where I decided I would really start drinking. I'd always enjoyed a drink and other substances back in the late 90s and early 2000s. The nightclub scene was phenomenal. This is where I firmly got the bug of partying, and partying hard. Enter Sambuca, Aftershock, all the alco pops you can think of. Decades passed, and as I got higher up in the corporate world, I was introduced into the world of really expensive, well for my class anyway, booze. Before I knew it, I was drinking $500 bottles of wine and $100 bottles of whiskey, etc. Where I'm going with this, I'm not entirely sure, but trying to set the scene, I suppose. Let's get back to 2016. I gave up booze for 6 months and felt great. Got my garden sorted, made great progress on a couple of car projects I had, and was very much enjoying the company of my daughter, who at this point was only 8. More on her involvement later. A couple of years passed and the liver issues continued. I was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver in, I think, late 2017, early 2018, but simply didn't believe it. I will never forget the words of the consultant as she presented the numbers to me. I quote, "Mr. X, you have cirrhosis. Do you know what that means?" Of course I didn't, and smugly asked her what can be done to fix it. She put her head in her hands and just said, "You're so young, Mr. X, there's nothing you can do, and if you continue, then we won't see you again in this hospital under such informal circumstances. We will be discussing your end-of-life care." Take a moment and let that sink in, because I didn't. I phoned the wife. She almost passed out with fear, but I didn't. I simply did not believe what I was told. My thoughts were, I'll cut down, be cool, so I did. I started feeling twinges in my liver, and my response, yep, let's get fucked up. So I went to the kitchen and poured myself half a pint of Jim Beam and necked it. Returned to the sitting room and watched a movie, and the pain was gone. For now. This continued, and the sicker I got. I mentioned my daughter earlier. She saw the penultimate downfall, and while I was sweating bullets and going through withdrawals, she brought me ice water with chunks of cucumber and some toast with grapes. Remember, she was 8 at this point, and she had no idea what was going on. I can't think of a way to both apologize to her and thank her at the same time. She contributed to saving my life. Spring forward to 2019, around June. I had no booze for the whole year, and we went to Florida for a big trip I'd been planning, and the second I got on that plane, the lady arrived with complimentary bubbles as part of the upgrade I got for the family. So, it began. I assured my wife I'd be cool, and that was that. 9 hours later, we arrived at Orlando International, and I'd stuck to my word. Had only 1 glass on the plane, and picked our hire car up. A gigantic Lincoln Navigator thing that was awesome. But this Scotsman did not have the special awareness sober, never mind drunk. More on this later. As the holiday progressed, I decided that I'll get back on it and walk to the nearest store. I bought a massive bottle of Jack, I think the US troops call it a handle, and began on the way home. A 20-minute walk in 100 degrees and 90% humidity was thirsty work. Anyway, fast forward 3 weeks and I was ill. Think Bart Simpson yellow and barely able to talk. The last week of the holiday I spent in the villa with my wife, Ubering to the parks and keeping my daughter away from the mess I'd become. Embarrassing. Somehow I sobered up enough to drive us to the airport. We stopped for fuel, and when leaving, I clipped a car with the rental, and then upon being challenged, I squared up to, went to pick a fight with the occupants. A Scotsman in Florida. My wife was certain I'd be shot. The sheriff arrived, took my details, and after being satisfied I wasn't totally out of control, they sent us on our way to get a flight. To this day, I don't know if I am now on some sort of list that will prevent me from getting back into the United States. There's a photo of me in the cockpit of the plane before boarding had completed, and I was clearly jaundiced, but smiling, and sat next to my daughter in the second seat looking proud as punch. I barely remember this. 9 hours on a plane, sneaking to the galley to drink what they would sell me, and various trips to the bathroom to throw up. I think about the ridiculous position I put everyone in on that plane, and the risk of having an emergency declared halfway over the Atlantic and ruining hundreds of people's holiday. I cringe and apologize to everyone. I made it, somehow. I got home, went to bed, and passed out, then woke up. This is where it got really scary. I was just puking red blood everywhere from a bleed in my throat from esophageal varices. My daughter witnessed this. She heard me asking the doctor if I was dying. I had to explain this to her at some point. Late 2019, I was admitted to a specialist liver ward. Side note, if you ever feel like you are on the verge of a problem and want to know what the end-of-life situation looks like for someone with liver failure, then simply take a walk through one of these wards. It will scare you sober. I remember being hooked up to all sorts of things, vitamins, saline, antibiotics, and the lead consultant at the time told me I was the healthiest one in there. I was in for 10 days and saw the departure of 3 residents from various causes. Massive distended abdomens from serious ascites where they were draining liters of fluid every day from their bodies. I witnessed one old-timer who was suffering from extreme hepatic encephalopathy, hallucinations due to poison in the blood, who would scream and rip out his lines and spray blood everywhere. Anyway, when I was there, I awoke to 3 consultants and a psychiatrist who, upon closing the curtains around me, told me I had an infection in my liver, spleen, and general gastrointestinal system that, if not treated, would mean I'd be dead in 4 weeks. They couldn't tell me if the antibiotics were working, so the clock started. Twice daily bloods, checks, and well, as I'm still here typing this, I clearly made it. I was told this once again when I had some sort of reaction. Being told I had 4 weeks to live, twice, levels the playing field somewhat. I'm one of the lucky ones. The damage is done, and I have no doubt I have reduced my lifespan by at least a decade, but I am here. I have my family and my job, and although I feel down and depressed often, and I know that by simply cracking open a bottle it will make me feel better, but the thought of that killing me means that I must deal with the depression and get on with it. The Reddit effect, something I found by mistake and never knew I needed. I joined Reddit just after the peak of my illness when I was helpless and felt alone. I refused to go to meetings, so I thought what might be available online. Hear me when I say that this sub was a major factor in saving my life, my job, and my marriage. When the sub advertised for new mods, I decided to put a very late entry in and originally missed the cut, only to be saved and plucked from the masses and installed as one of the handful of mods that try our best to keep this place safe. It goes without saying that without the support of them throughout then, I would most certainly burn the account and moved on. But here I am 5 years later, and 2008 days sober. Crazy, really.